President-elect Trump is claiming that President Biden is making the White House transition difficult. I want you to listen to this. This is Trump. Listen to this.
They'll do everything they can to make it as difficult as possible. You know, they talk about a transition. They're always saying, oh, no, we want to have a smooth transition from party to party of government. Well, they're making it really difficult. They're throwing everything they can in the way.
I want to bring in CNN's Caitlin Collins. She's covering all of this for us. Caitlin, how is the president-elect reacting to this specific day, and why is he saying what he just said?
Well, Wolf, I'll note that comment there from Trump stands in pretty stark contrast to obviously his own actions 4 years ago that are the reason today got so much coverage. Typically, it was a day in elections past that didn't warrant a lot of attention, but because of what happened 4 years ago and Trump's effort to make the transition process quite difficult, to say the least, are the reason that there was such a reflection on what happened then and how today went. I mean, today's process lasted about 30 minutes. Last year, it took about 14 hours because, of course, they had to pause as rioters were storming the Capitol, and that came after weeks of Trump trying to sow doubt about the election and trying to overturn the results, which ultimately was unsuccessful. But on the effort about Biden trying to block his transition, as he alleged there, trying to make it more difficult, as he said. That's not a comment that his incoming chief of staff, Susie Wiles, echoed when she was speaking with Mark Caputo in an interview for Axios. She said that actually working with the Biden team had gone quite smoothly. We've seen some of those briefings getting underway. But Wolf, this comes as Trump is looking at today and seeing this as just one step closer to regaining power on January 20th and making those plans for what that's going to look like, and also just how differently Washington is going to be shaped when he comes here. I mean, you heard from John Curtis there, the newest senator from Utah, speaking to Manu. That is one voice who will certainly be someone to watch over the next few years, but he sounds very different than a lot of his Republican colleagues in the Senate, many of whom who were critical of Trump on that day are certainly not so now, Wolf.
Caitlin, on another sensitive issue, we've learned that the former leader of the Proud Boys is now asking President-elect Trump for a pardon for his role in the Capitol riot. Tell us about that. What are you hearing?
Yeah, this might be one of the most notorious defendants and ultimately who was convicted because of his actions on that day, Enrico Tarrio. He was a leader of the Proud Boys for quite some time. Obviously, they showed up en masse that day, and many of them were subsequently arrested and tried and convicted for their actions on that day. He got one of the longest sentences, actually, Wolf, out of anyone on January 6th. He got 22 years that he was sentenced for on very serious charges of a seditious conspiracy that only he and a handful of others faced on that day, and now is seeking a pardon from the president-elect Donald Trump. A question still tonight is whether or not he is going to get one. Trump has promised to pardon several of the January 6 defendants. It's unclear how many he's looking at now. And this is a real divide, even in Trump's orbit, over what that should look like, because he said he's going to do it not only on day one, but within moments of taking office. You've heard from some Republicans saying that Trump should do this on a case-by-case basis, that he should evaluate this. But then you've heard others who argue that Trump should just pardon all of them, that the prosecutions were overly aggressive. That is going to be a big thing to watch on that day because, of course, as you know, Wolf, over 140 police officers were assaulted on that day by the people who were convicted, a lot of them who also pleaded guilty.
Caitlin Collins reporting for us. Caitlin, thank you very much. Caitlin, of course, will be back later tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern, for her excellent show, The Source. We'll be watching. Let's get some analysis from our excellent political experts who are with us right now. David Chalian, you're a political director, Washington Bureau Chief. Pretty striking statement from Trump accusing President Biden of, quote, doing every possible thing to make the transition difficult, and saying this on January 6th of all days, because Biden and the Biden administration have been doing everything possible to make this as smooth as possible, inviting Trump to the White House, making it clear that he will be attending the inauguration and all of that.
Yes, in his Washington Post op-ed today, the president said he intends to continue the tradition of inviting the president on the morning of the inauguration of the White House, in addition to the visit that they had in the immediate aftermath of the election. Those kinds of traditions for the peaceful transfer of power are clearly important for President Biden in his mind to reset that, because that was absent from what Donald Trump obviously refused to offer Joe Biden 4 years ago. But I just want to say, this comment that he was making, I don't think Donald Trump was trying to equate his own January 6th behavior or anything related to the 6th of January. This was on Hugh Hewitt this morning in context of this conversation about Biden's actions about banning offshore drilling and putting a sort of environmental legacy piece in place that is trying to make it more difficult for the Trump team to instantly overturn it, and that perhaps it would need to go through legislative action. And I think that was the context of the point of that Donald Trump was making, although I will say my ears perked up when I heard that, because what I heard, Wolf, in that moment was a former president who 2 weeks from right now will be 6 hours into his second presidency, laying the groundwork to point fingers and blame Joe Biden for anything that is not going the way that he wanted or scoring big victories right away out of the gate. Guarantee you're going to hear a lot of blame about Joe Biden.
Let me get Brian Morgenstern to react. You served in the Trump White House. You know what's going on. What's your reaction to this?
Well, my reaction is that we have seen some disruption. I mean, it wasn't just the oil drilling. It was trying to sell off pieces of the border wall for scraps. So there have been some things behind the scenes where they're trying to cement policies and make it more difficult for President Trump. That's very frustrating for him. So I certainly understand where he's coming from. As for January 6th, today it was a decisive victory. It was a very clean and clear process that is refreshing, that is positive for the country. I think that everyone was able to get through this unscathed and without incident. That is a great day for America.
An enormous contrast to what the Trump White House did 4 years ago.
Well, 4 years ago, the president did say peacefully and patriotically go to the Capitol. Obviously, we saw what unfolded. The American people and the voters also saw the lawfare that came before and after that. They saw the weaponization of the federal government against political opponents, and they voted to stop that. But they voted to secure the border.
They didn't vote for what happened on January 6th. They didn't vote for what happened on January 6th. And I think what you've seen today is really. Yes, the peaceful transfer of power, it is in marked contrast to what happened on January 6th. And Donald Trump, the problem is that part of what happened on January 6th is the story that Donald Trump wants to tell about himself, that he didn't lose and that these people were actually acting in a just cause, and that's why he wants to pardon them. But that is not the real story. And he's made it part of loyalty tests. You have to answer whether or not you believe that he won the last election. In order to work for him in this current administration that is coming. So the problem here is that we are still in the era of January 6th 4 years ago. That hasn't changed.
Go ahead, Karen.
In the bigger picture, though, Lulu, to what you're saying, this is why the American people deserve a full accounting of history. And it's why Merrick Garland should release the final report that he gets from Jack Smith. Because we, the people, we paid for it with our tax dollars. We deserve to know, for the record of history, what exactly happened. You heard a new Republican senator even say, we don't really know all the facts about what happened. We deserve to know the facts, particularly because what we're seeing is akin to what we're seeing conservative MAGA folks do all over the country. They're trying to rewrite history and gaslight us that what we saw with our own eyes didn't happen, and it did happen. And we need to know, as we try, I appreciate that Joe Biden is trying to say to people, let's lay down a marker around what the norms really are, what it should look like. But at the same time, there has to be accountability. There has to be some transparency here so that people really know what lengths.
Unfortunately, I don't think there will be. I mean, no. I think, what actually, and I think you're right here, what voters said is that actually this didn't matter to them and that they would vote for Donald Trump. That is at least the lesson that Donald Trump has taken
That's
from
the
this.
lesson that Donald Trump wants to take, but let's be very clear. An election is not the same thing as a jury verdict where the same group of people heard all of the same evidence and then rendered a verdict. That's
the
not
political
the same.
verdict takes into account the fact that, look, I was in the White House where BLM rioters were trying to get in. I had to have the Secret Service help me get home safely. Those people were not treated as harshly as some of the people on January 6th. We saw some people
But you
were
know that
peaceful
those are
and
two different
invited
things.
in.
Those
Others
are absolutely
were
two
not.
different things.
But,
Yeah.
well,
Those are one group of people. Wait, let's be clear.
A two-tiered system of justice
hold
that
on.
people did vote on.
One group of people were protesting for racial justice, and one group of people were trying to
burning down police stations and
trying
burning
to
down courthouses,
and we're
and they
trying to
murdered a police officer in Missouri.
overturn a legitimate election. Those are two very different things, and we did see people prosecuted for violent actions when they took them, but a group of people coming on to the steps of the Capitol, trying to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, let us be clear, It is not the same
The fact
thing.
that this debate and conversation is still happening to me shows that it's not just trying to gaslight or whitewash or erase history, what everyone saw before their eyes 4 years ago, because we did all see it. It's actually the success of that effort. It's not it's not just that he's trying, but that Donald Trump has successfully convinced a huge swath of America that they didn't see what they saw on January 6th. And when it was litigated politically, and this is where the election comes into play, as you noted, this was not the thing that voters decided this past election on. They weren't affirming Donald Trump's behavior of January 6th in any way whatsoever.
No.
But they were saying that was not how they were going to decide the results of this most recent